What is up, y'all? Welcome back to Fish the Moment live stream. Today we are joined by Randy Blaukat, and we're going to be going over the winning pattern for the Major League Fishing Redcrest on Grand Lake. Just finished up. Pretty awesome tournament to watch, especially because it's right here in our backyard for Randy and myself. And we're going to kind of break down what happened. It was funny because I fished a lot of the spots that the guys were fishing the first few days, and we were almost pretty accurate with our predictions. There's a few things that kind of were at play that we're going to talk about with the conditions, how everything changed. Everything's always going crazy on Grand Lake. Water's rising, temperatures changing, all kinds of stuff. And so it was a pretty wild tournament, and we'll get into all of that. But first up, Randy, how's it going tonight?
Doing good, Johnny. I'm down here at Cherokee Lake right now. Just been on the water. I just got off the water about an hour ago. So restaurant here, jumped in the shower, got on time for the podcast, and trying to figure out these smallmouth here on Cherokee Lake.
Yeah, you're saying it was pretty tough. Those opens, it's getting crazy in those opens. It seems like there's more people than ever fishing them, and it's like, how do you deal with the fishing pressure of 200, 300 really good anglers for 4 or 5 days beforehand? I know some of those guys are out there for a week or two beforehand fishing for those opens. So, how's the fishing pressure and everything?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I don't think I've ever remembered a tournament where the fishing pressure was so intense as far as everybody fishing the same stuff. I mean, Cherokee Lake, if you guys don't know it, is it's an East Tennessee lake, sort of a clear water highland impoundment. It's got quite a few rocky points on it, and literally 90% of the points have got boats on them all day long, just rotating the same water. So it's there must be maybe co-anglers down here practicing or something. I'm not sure, but it's that's going to be the story of the week: who can overcome the fishing pressure here.
Gotcha. Well, hopefully Livescope doesn't play too much of a role, but I have a feeling it might. So we'll see how that one goes as well.
Oh, they've been live scoped, and I've been seeing them. Although I did see Gerald Swindle today fishing a finesse jig on dock, so at least he's not live scoping.
There we go. Good deal. Well, we're going to get into all the stuff on Redcrest, kind of walk through. There's going to be a lot of live scope talk, Randy, so we'll see if you can hold up over that, but hopefully we'll be good. We'll be able to make it through. And then actually the winning pattern was anti-live scope, no live scope. So that's another win. 2 major tournaments in a row, no live scope. So that's nice
good.
right there.
That is getting into that time of year.
There we go. So let's first give a huge shout out to a few of our sponsors. First up, we want to give a shout out to Bridgeford Foods. Guys, I know you guys have been giving me feedback that I should flip the screen, and I've tried to figure out every single way to flip the screen, and once I flip the screen to get the Bridgeford logo to show up the right way, it flips everything else. So I show a lot of different graphics and everything like that, so I apologize if it bugs you with the Bridgeford being backwards, but we're doing the best so we can get all the graphics and stuff in as well. But bear with us here with all of our technical stuff. But we do want to give a huge shout out to Bridgeford. They are the longest sponsor of the Fish Moment live stream and a great ambassador for the sport of bass fishing. If you watch Major League Fishing Redcrest, you'll see that Luke Clausen finished second, is a Bridgeford pro. They support bass fishing at all levels, from the professional level all the way down to the local level, and here on YouTube with the Fish Moment live stream and podcast. So if you guys are interested in getting some great snacks for the boat, looking for a good way to fuel up all your fishing, check out Bridgeford Beef Jerky at your local Walmarts, Dollar General, the dollar stores, and then also at gas stations. You can find some Bridgeford beef jerky. My favorite flavor is the sweet teriyaki. If you haven't tried it, the original is really good, but the sweet teriyaki is definitely my favorite right here. So this is my go-to, and definitely, guys, just give it a try. It'll help support the podcast, help support a great company that supports bass fishing. Next up, want to give a shout out to our other sponsor, the Bass Tank. The Bass Tank is the premier bass fishing electronics installation company in the country. They're based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. They have a massive inventory of fish finders, one of the biggest inventories in the entire country. So if you guys are interested in finding what fish finder works best for your boat, head over to thebasstank.com. You can either reach out to them through their contact information or give them a call at their number, which is 918-509-7864. Again, their number is 918 509-7864. They have a great support team that can walk you through all your needs, whether you're a crappie guy, bass, catfish, whatever you're looking for in terms of your fish finder setup. They will make sure that you have the right electronics set up on your boat for the right species and the right scenario. So definitely check it out. They have a lot of great forward-facing sonar bundles. They have a lot of other fish finders and other great electronics that are on the boat that they have here on thebasstank.com. So again, sponsor of the live streams, definitely check them out and support the companies to help support our content. There we go. So Randy, let's jump into Redcrest. And I'm going to kind of, I don't know how closely you followed it. I know you said you didn't follow it as closely. I tried to follow it as close as I could. I was on vacation all last week, but every time I had a second away, I was like watching on my phone, trying to see what these guys are doing. And they actually post the entire live streams, guys, so you can watch them on Major League Fishing. I think it's called big5.com, or you can just type in Major League Fishing Redcrest. You can watch all the coverage from all the days. So I spent some time today going through some of the coverage, seeing where these guys were fishing, and they were all over all of my juice, Randy, which is to be expected. And it was pretty interesting because I was like, oh, I've caught a 5-pounder there. I've caught a 3-pounder there. I've caught 4-pounders right there. And I mean, literally, it was like Wheeler was all over my stuff, Jordan Lee, Edwin Evers, they were just all over the juice. And it kind of sucks because the places they were fishing normally don't get that much fishing pressure. And so now they're going to get covered up. But that's the way it goes.
Well, it goes to show you because I mean, you're really good at reading like the GPS mapping and that type of stuff. And Edwin Evers and those guys, they are too. So you guys have sort of a like mind, because when you look at a mapping system of Grand Lake, you can pick those places out that most people just bypass. I mean, it's something that, you guys just sort of have an eye for that. And, like I said, I can't believe that those guys found that spot. I know exactly where Johnny's talking about. It's not an obvious spot. I mean, it's not like if you pull up to it, it sticks out. I mean, it's something that you've got to find on your GPS mapping. So there's no secrets anymore, man. It's just like you think there are, but there's not.
For sure. And we're going to jump into actually exactly where these guys are fishing. I know a lot of the places were exactly where they were. So we're going to be jumping into that. By the way, if you guys are in the live chat, I'm removing this guy over here just to let you guys know, because there's a guy bashing our sponsors, and he's basically saying everything is bad. So I don't think he's real, guys. I think he's a troll. So don't pay attention to trolls. I just get rid of those people when they do that. It's just the internet. But anyways, guys, let's jump into kind of an overview. So I want to give a heads up, Randy, because I actually tried to go out and fish on Grand Lake to do a preview video before I went on vacation a couple weeks ago. And it's kind of interesting because when I got to Grand Lake, I was trying to fish and do all this stuff. And unfortunately, about 2 hours in the day, all my electronics, maybe 3 hours in the day, all my electronics died again. I've had this happen to me twice now. It's because I have a bad charger, and I have a new charger the Bass Tank sent me, and I was too lazy to plug it in. So this charger I have is bad, and so it charges my batteries like only halfway. So there's my bad on the charger thing. But I was able to get a little bit of info, and the two things I figured out when I was out there, Randy, is that the shallow bite was really tough because I spent 4 or 5 hours fishing up shallow after my electronics petered out on me, and I wasn't able to get anything going. And basically what happened is that when I went to the lake, I went back into the back of one of these creeks, Duck Creek. And the water temperature was a lot colder than I expected because we'd recently had a lot of snow in Oklahoma. And the backs of these creeks back in here, normally if you look at the water clarity here, you might have 1.5 to 2 foot of visibility. Well, because of all the runoff, all the backs of these creeks were absolutely flooded with muddy water, and the water temperatures back here, Randy, were 49 degrees. It's the end of March, and water temperatures were 49 degrees in the back of these creeks. That's super cold. That is not normal for this time of year. So because the water temperatures were so cold back in these creeks and everything was kind of flooded out, these creeks were kind of blown out and didn't play any factor. And I tried fishing up shallow through these areas. I caught several smaller fish, like 1.5, 2 pounders, nothing, crazy up shallow. I didn't catch anything big. And within the first 2 hours of the day, I did manage to catch 1 3-pounder and lose a 4-pounder. And what I found was that I spent some time back in these areas here looking around, and I realized it was all blown out. So I ran back into Ketchum Cove over here, And what I noticed is that there was a bunch of shad all over the back of Ketchum Cove back in here, like shad everywhere. And this is actually where Michael Neal ended up catching a ton of his fish, and he actually, I think, led both of his rounds fishing back in this area. And right here in front of this boat dock, there's a ton of shad, and there's actually a little rocky drop-off here. And before my electronics died, I actually caught one on a jerkbait right here and lost about a 4-pounder. And then my electronics literally gave out on me, and I was live scoping all those fish. And that's exactly where Michael Neal was catching them, was right back in here. And I didn't really feel like it was worth making a video about, because I didn't really have, when electronics die on me, I lose all the recordings, and I didn't really have anything to show. So I'm not going to make a video on it, but just to give you guys here some idea, basically the reason that this creek was good is because it wasn't blown out. We had good water clarity, 2 to 3 feet still, and there was a ton of bait back in here. And so really what this did is it made the shallow bite really difficult in a lot of guys in the beginning rounds. There were a few guys who caught some fish up shallow, specifically Bobby Lane caught a few fish cranking. There's a couple guys who were able to get that shallow bite going, but the majority of the guys that were catching them caught them offshore for the first 4 days of the event. This again was a combination of a lot of the colder water, colder than they were expecting, and you were getting a lot of runoff in the back of these creeks. At the same time, you also had water levels rising. And so during the tournament, there was a lot of rain, which rose the water level, muddied up the water that was already muddy and made it muddier. And I think it just really messed up these shallow water fish. Normally when that water is rising, it's good. But when that water is rising and it's cold and it's already kind of muddy and those shallow fish aren't up there anyways, it took those fish a while to get up into that shallow water. Now, by the end of the tournament, the guys were actually able to find some fish up shallow, and Bobby Lane actually caught them the last day and won the tournament, fishing up in shallow water in the backs of these boat docks, behind boat docks, and cranking, which is how you predicted the tournament was going to be won in our live stream a couple weeks ago. So that was awesome. Got the prediction right. But Bobby had to basically grind it out and barely survive the first 2 days or 3 days he fished because he wasn't really fishing for where the most of the fish were. He basically was fishing for maybe 20% of the bass population up in these shallower water pockets and areas. The majority of the fish, and were Edwin Evers, Jordan Lee, Jacob Wheeler were catching them. A lot of these guys were fishing in this kind of midsection of the lake, fishing offshore. And I'll give you guys the exact spots that a lot of these guys were fishing. I know a lot of the spots. I know the exact brush piles a lot of these guys were fishing. So I'll show you the exact spots here in a second. But that's just a general overview, Randy, and I wanted to get your opinion on what you thought about that.
Well, one of the things about that strikes me about, especially the first couple of days of that tournament, is without a doubt, those fish, you would not have seen those fish caught without Livescope. I mean, those were Livescope dominated bass completely. So I find that, every tournament, you've got that factoring in to some extent. And especially with guys like Edwin Evers and Wheeler both, they're Livescoping them with jerkbaits now. It's like, people, a lot of people have considered Livescope more of a deep offshore, swim bait type deal. But I mean, we're seeing these people like Evers and those guys, they're getting up into this medium depth, it's like 3 to 6 foot zone, live scoping them. And even Luke Clausen was saying, he said something about the last cast of the day, he saw a 3-pounder on his live scope following his jerk bait. I mean, so you're seeing fish caught at Grand Lake that never would have been caught here 20 years ago. The thing that surprised me about this tournament is I thought that a spinnerbait would be a lot more dominating with the water coming in and dirtying up the backs of those creeks and that water filtering out farther up in the creeks, and the weather being really cold, abnormally cold. That was the big factor to me that really surprised me. I thought those big bags would be caught on 3/4 ounce spinnerbait, slow rolling them, and I think there was a few guys caught them like that, but not very many.
Yeah.
It was a grind because if you take away this tournament, if you take away the live scope caught fish, then it becomes a pretty hard grind in this tournament overall. I mean, I talked to Brent Chapman for quite a while the other day about it. He had a decent first day and he got knocked out the second day, and he was catching all his fish right up on the bank, chatterbait and shallow cranking and stuff like that, which I thought would be the dominating techniques. I had no idea that somebody would catch those kind of weights on a Demiki rig at Grand Lake. I don't think I've ever heard of a bass being caught on Grand on a Demiki rig.
Yeah, that's crazy. And that's kind of the Michael Neal effect there. And it was interesting, Randy, because these guys, like, if you kind of take a look, here's a general idea of where all these guys were. And I don't know where everyone was. I didn't have a chance to kind of break down where everybody was. But I do know that there were definitely some guys. I know that Bobby Lane, I saw him catch a fish back off one of these banks back in the back of Drowning Creek back in here. I just recognized the bank from being fishing on the lake. And I think he caught a lot of his fish back in the back of Drowning Creek back in here. And he was cranking with a flat side crankbait. It looked like a Fritz side Berkeley from the pictures. So cranking a flat side crankbait. And then he caught a couple fish at the end of the day, a big one on the last day on a jig. And on the live stream, he was saying that he caught a bunch of fish behind docks and around docks on the jig in practice when it was sunny. But then during the tournament, it got really cloudy and windy and a lot of rain, so he picked up the crankbait and did most of his damage on that. But it seemed like the only really productive area was this Drowning Creek area. And I actually didn't get back in there during the day I was scouting around. I just mainly stuck in Duck Creek and this Ketchum Cove. But from what it looked like on the live stream, this creek was staying pretty clear, even though there was a lot of runoff rain. And I just don't know if that's a characteristic of Drowning Creek, but it definitely seemed like this creek in particular set up well for that crankbait. And that's something that is really important, guys, to note, is that certain sections of these lakes set up for certain techniques and certain styles. So, for example, Drowning Creek back in here was one of the few creeks, maybe the only creek, that really set up well for a crankbait, for a flatside crankbait all week. There wasn't anyone fishing up in the Elk River from what I could see, which is normally a popular place. I didn't see a lot of guys fishing kind of mid-lake, or even, there's a few guys fishing around Honey Creek, but it didn't really dominate. It was really, if you were in the back of Drowning Creek where Bobby Ling was, it seemed pretty easy to get that shallow bite going, or not easy, but easier. And if you were anywhere else trying to get it done, it was really hard. The same thing happened if you were trying to fish the offshore bite. Luke Clausen caught a lot of fish offshore. He was cranking, jerkbait and stuff in this Horse Creek area, along with Edwin Evers. Jordan Lee was in this exact same area, and then Jacob Wheeler was bouncing around in this general area as well. And where Edwin Evers was fishing along with Jordan Lee is, if you go right here, this is actually a marina where Randy and I launch. And I was actually planning on fishing this area here, Randy, and the reason I didn't the day it went out, this is actually my favorite area in the entire lake, but the wind was blowing like 25 from the south. 25 miles an hour from the south, and that blows out this area of the lake. And that's actually what happened on the last day of the tournament. The winds were blowing 20 miles an hour out of the south, and Edwin and all the guys fishing in this area weren't able to keep their boat in position and live scope these fish that were setting up in this part of the lake because the waves were hitting too strong. And what they were doing is they were live scoping these fish up shallower, and they had to see them to get their jerkbait in front of them to get them to react. Well, when your boat is taking waves over the front because your bow is bouncing and all that stuff, it's hard to live scope. So I think that really hurt a lot of the live scopers the last day in the fact that the wind really blew out a lot of these flatter open areas. And Edwin, he was basically catching some fish off of, there's some poles and stuff in the entrance to this Southwinds Marina boat ramp, and you can see them pretty obvious on the live stream. And there's a ditch that runs through here. And I've caught a bunch of fish off this spot in like May and June. I've caught them in this time of year as well. It's a really good area. And there's a bunch of rock out here and debris and rubble. And Jordan Lee actually caught a really good fish and a couple fish off of a brush pile that was a little bit further out off this little point. Luke Clausen caught some fish off this point that stuck out right here. Caught some nice ones cranking and kind of these little just offshore deals, but they weren't deep. It's like 5 maybe to 7 feet of water, 8, 9 feet of water, and it was these subtle little rounded points where guys come out here and plant brush, whether it's like a point that sticks out like from here. If you're going down some of these banks, maybe it's like a point that sticks out from one of these islands like right in here. One of these humps out here, there's always a lot of brush off this. These areas out here and here, these little high spots out here can hold a lot of fish. And then just other sorts of little drop-offs off some of these, in front of these islands here and just down this area. This is what these guys were doing, and there's brush out there, there's rock, there's house foundations, there's all kinds of stuff out here in this area of the lake. And guys were getting out in front of these kind of spawning pockets, spawning coves, getting out in that 8 to 12 foot range and finding brush, finding debris, live scoping them with a jerkbait, and that was really dominant. There are also a few guys like Jacob Wheeler who were getting into other creeks and getting off some of these really flat banks, or even banks that necessarily weren't super flat, but super flat like this, but still flatter, like in this area, and they were finding brush and stuff that's planted by locals. And there's a million brush piles on Grand Lake, and so they were getting out off points like this, not maybe this exact spot, but points like this that lead into the back of spawning pockets, and there were live scoping brush piles, throwing their jerkbaits over the top of them and catching fish. So that was really the dominant pattern for a lot of the week, for the first 4 days of the event. And there's really not a ton of water that you can use this pattern in, especially with the water visibility the way it was. Really, you had like Horse Creek. There's a few of these smaller creeks like West Bay and some of the creeks down in here, maybe in this area as well. But after you got further up the lake, the water started to muddy up to the point where it was harder to get those fish to react to a jerkbait. And then further down the lake, it seemed like that jerkbait bite still was working in some parts, but for whatever reason, the crankbait bite worked better in drowning. And then back in this part of the creek, back in Ketchum, this is where Michael Neal was catching him with the live scope on a little Demiki rig, or a little small swim bait, and that was working for him over the jerkbait. So a lot of different patterns going on. That's kind of my summary of what happened, Randy. But what are your thoughts on all of those things?
I like I said, this tournament just really surprises me a lot, because normally, and I fished Grand Lake since 1970. I've been on the thing end to end forever. In March, this time of year, normally brush piles are a non-issue. The fact I just can't ever remember brush piles being a factor in a March tournament this time of year. But that was prior to Livescope. I mean, Livescope has taught people about how those fish use those piles. They can go to the piles that have the fish on it. And the way that those guys are fishing, it's not easy. I mean, it is not easy. It's something that you have to have a commitment for. We can sit here on this live stream and talk about, they were fishing old house foundations and they were fishing brush piles and that type of stuff. But that's like finding a needle in a haystack of needles. It's not easy to do. And with only 20 guys, they have 20 guys per round in this, so there's only 40 guys in the tournament. So they didn't have any fishing pressure on this lake. I just cannot believe that there wasn't more guys that caught them just cranking that 2 to 4 foot zone, crawfish pattern crankbaits on the bank, in the coves, behind the docks, that type of stuff. That's normally where those big fish are at in March. And it just goes to show you that there's an evolution taking place on all of our lakes across the country, including Grand Lake, because for so many years, March is known as the best month to fish Grand Lake. And back when I was fishing it constantly, back in the late 70s and early 80s, mid 80s, if you went to Grand Lake in March and you put on like a 7A bomber or a deep weir crawdad pattern and you didn't catch a 20-pound bag, it was a bad day. Those fish have evolved. A lot of them probably aren't there, but those fish have evolved and they've moved off the bank to these obscure places like you're talking about, these house foundations, these subtle breaks, chasing shad schools, brush piles, that type of stuff. And it's just a completely different population of fish. I think one of the things that really helped out Michael Neal in this tournament is the first day of that tournament was the weather. It was cold, it was cloudy. He was in the clearest part of the lake. I think that really fired those fish up he was after. I think if he'd had a bright day with not much wind, or even a little bit of wind, I think he'd have struggled a little bit more. But normally on Grand Lake, what you have is when you have areas that get blown out like that, it not only hurts some areas, but it creates a lot of opportunity as well. And I don't think a lot of guys in this tournament took advantage of the opportunity that came with that dirty water. I think that they may have got locked into what they were doing in practice a little bit more. And I think that if this tournament would have had a lot more local guys in it, I think you'd have seen the weights bigger, and I think you'd seen guys fishing a lot different for the most part. But I'm surprised with it. Like I said, I watched a little bit of it, and when I was watching Edwin the first day of that tournament when he caught a couple of those good ones, and it's like he was throwing a jerkbait, just looking down at his live scope the whole time. And it's just like something that's so foreign to fish in that lake. And another thing that surprises me about that area, that your honey hole there, Johnny, is normally that's a little bit too dirty for a jerkbait. That's really, really marginal water clarity, especially for the day they had. So I'm really surprised that they caught them on a jerkbait there. And if they couldn't have pinpointed those fish with that live scope, I don't think you could have just went fishing down those banks and on those points and caught them hardly at all with a jerkbait in that situation. So
yeah. And if you look at the weights, sorry to cut you off there, I knew I wanted to show this real quick. If you look at the weights across these events, you can see the first day, Edwin and Michael Neal, 39 pounds, 35 pounds, and 29 pounds. That was after the cold fronts. Water temperatures are still cold. Water was low, 3 feet lower than by the end of the tournament, and it was cold. Live scoper. That was the deal. Bobby Lane still did pretty well. He found a little deal. I know Brian Thrift was offshore fishing. I don't know if he was live scoping exactly, but a few guys caught him shallower, but the guys that dominated were the live scopers. Go to qualifying day round 2. Same deal. These guys didn't really throw the hammer down, but Jordan Lee caught 34 pounds the second day, all live scoping in Horse Creek with a jerkbait, kind of the same deal as Edwin, even bouncing in the same areas. And again, the guys who were fishing traditional styles, your Takahiro Amore, Bobby Lane, they still caught some fish. There were still shallow fish to be caught. It's still Grand Lake, but it wasn't necessarily as easy. But then, as the weekend went on, you started seeing a transition. Luke Clausen, Andy Morgan, they started picking it up and catching more fish up shallow. Still, some of the shallower guys not doing as well, but Luke was doing a little bit of offshore and shallow fishing. But Edwin really dropped off, 15 pounds. Brian Thrift, offshore, 12 pounds. And then Group B, same exact deal. We're getting these weights dropping down. But there was still a live scoper bite going on. So live scoping Jordan Lee, Michael Neal, Dustin Connell, all live scoping. Jacob Wheeler, live scoping. Bobby Lane, though, finding that shallow bite. And then the final day, Bobby Lane, shallow, was able to get it going because the fish started positioning better up shallow, and those offshore fish were getting pounded, for one thing, by all the guys fishing the same stuff, and that bite was probably slowly starting to disappear. Now, Jacob Wheeler, he had 28 pounds for 8 bass. If you had given him a 5-fish total, Randy, he'd probably be well over 20 pounds.
Yeah.
And like Edwin had 4 fish for 16 pounds. Jordan Lee, 6 fish for 16. So there were guys catching some big ones still offshore. But as the event transitioned, the water raised up 3 feet. The water was warming up, and it was starting to push more fish up shallow. And those guys fishing offshore, they just didn't have the numbers they needed, even if the size was still there. So I thought that was pretty interesting too.
Yeah, and I think another thing that everybody needs to remember on this tournament is the MLF format, made these guys fish a little bit different. I mean, I really don't feel that a lot of these guys would have fished like that under a normal format. Some of them may have, but that throws a little bit of a twist into it. But man, it's we were talking about that when we came down here. Did anybody do any good up in the area you predicted up in Spring River by chance, Jonny?
No, I think it was just the water came up 3 feet, and then it was cold. Yeah, I made a prediction, guys. That was maybe a foolhardy prediction. That was like my wild, like off the wall. So I made a prediction that maybe someone could catch him way up here in the Spring River if they got on a million little buck bass. I think if the water was stable and it was 60 degrees, this still could have been a player, but I think this was all blown out probably.
To me, that part of the lake is only good for spoonbills in March up there.
Yeah, maybe that's a little bit hasty. I'm actually surprised, Randy, that I didn't think that these guys, once I actually got out to the lake, I thought the water temperature was going to be warmer. I honestly thought it was going to be 55 to 60 degrees. I didn't think it was going to be in the low 50s, high 40s. So my prediction definitely would have been more probably that offshore-ish bite. Could play with maybe not the jerk baits and the brush piles, but definitely jerk baits on shallow rock and like the house foundations. My prediction was that they were going to catch him jerk baiting the dock things and different parts of the boat docks, but I think that really that didn't play as much just because there were enough fish offshore where they could make the live scope work. And that's one thing I've noticed, Randy, with a lot of the guys fishing these major tournaments. Guys are going into these tournaments now looking for Livescope fish. You can just tell by the way that they're fishing. They're saying, I have the best opportunity to win this tournament if I can find fish that I can see on my Livescope and target with Livescope. They're not even going to the bank or going shallow. Some guys are, Bobby Lane, some of the guys are just going to keep doing that. But guys like Jacob Wheeler, maybe Negwin Evers, definitely Michael Neal, Dustin Connell, these guys are saying, I'm going offshore. Or I'm maybe not saying they're going offshore, but they're going to find a way to catch fish on Livescope because they realize that if they can get on an area that has a bunch of fish in it and they can watch those fish, they can see how big they are, they can see how they react to their bait, they can trigger them to bite. It is a huge competitive advantage, and it's almost like guys are now thinking about bass fishing. Before you would think, okay, I need to go to the lake to figure out how to get bit, what's the right bait, anything like that. I think the way that tournament fishing is going is that people are saying, where on this lake can I use Livescope to catch fish? And they cross off all the parts of the lake where you can't use it. Usually you need probably like 2.5 foot of visibility is probably ideal, and up to clear water. And then you need to have fish that you're positioned by some type of offshore cover, brush piles, rock piles, something like that, which is what's happening here in Horse Creek. There's a lot of brush, a lot of shell beds. You actually, guys, you can probably, I have like 4 or 5 YouTube videos fishing in here on stuff in Horse Creek with all my waypoints showing. I have a bunch of videos. Actually, right here, Andy, off this point, I caught a double, a 4 and a 3 pounder on one cast with a crankbait. Caught 15 pounds off that point right there. So I have some videos on Grand fishing this area. It's my favorite area of the lake. And then Michael Neal, he was fishing in this creek because there was a bunch of bait fish, and he was focused on bass that were keying on bait fish. He was just live scoping around, catching fish like that. And that's where I think the sport's going, Randy. And I know that really hurts probably for you to hear, but to be competitive, I feel like nowadays in these tournaments, especially with how effective Livescope is, and then also in this like catch it everything you can format with like Major League Fishing, I think that guys are going to realize that if you are not finding fish that you can see on Livescope, you're just at a strict disadvantage most of the time. Now that might leave other fish for other guys, but I do see as people get better and better and better with technology, that's where we're going. What's your take on that?
Well, here's the thing. We've talked about Livescope a lot on the podcast here, and people say, like you're beating a dead horse, but I don't think that you can. What we've learned about Livescope and what we're learning here, just really in the last 6 months, is that you're not going to be able to have a bass fishing conversation without forward-facing sonar being part of that conversation. You just can't do it. It's not, and there's people, I'm still convinced that 75% of the people out there are against it, 25% want it. I'm unless that's the demographic I get my information from. But you're going to hear us and everybody talk about Livescope a lot when we talk about bass fishing, because it's becoming such a role in the tournaments on so many different levels that you just can't deny it. And guys like Dustin Connell and Evers and Wheeler and those type of guys and yourself, I mean, they are showing everybody that this thing, nobody has seen the limits to it yet. I mean, there is really no limits to how you can utilize this particular tool in fishing. I mean, in 3 foot of water or in 100 foot of water, it doesn't matter. Every single one of these tournaments, almost without exception, to some degree, Livescope's playing a role in it. So you're going to hear it in every fishing conversation from now on. I still stand behind the thing that I think that, I'm still against it. We've talked about why I'm against it and everything. But I think in the tournaments that there needs to be an asterisk next to the Livescopers versus the people that don't catch them. I would be interested in hearing that. I think it speaks volumes for the sport as far as where it's going, technique, that type of stuff. But it's going to be, for everybody out there, whether you like it or don't like it, it's going to be part of the conversation. And there are going to be very few tournaments moving forward that aren't won to some degree with it. Now, you can get checks and you can finish in the money and you can qualify for the Bassmasters Classic without using it. There's guys that do that. There's a population of fish in every single lake across the country where you can have a top 10 finish and not have any Livescope. But it is very difficult to put yourself over the heap to win a tournament, like what Bobby Lane did. that's an exception to the rule, and it's going to continue to be an exception to the rule. Because here's the thing, unfortunately, about forward-facing sonar is the technology of forward-facing sonar is still in its infancy. That is it. It is going to be refined and improved over and over again to to my great disapproval. But I think you're right, Johnny. I think if you're a serious tournament angler and you don't have you're not bullheaded like I am when it comes to it, you have got to learn it. I mean, if you want to win and if you want to make a career moving forward, that would be a primary focus, for anyone moving forward.
Well, and I think that's the thing is some people are saying, well, I caught fish on a wiggle board up shallow, and someone's saying they caught them over 100 feet, 50 feet of water. And to your point, Randy, you can catch them doing a lot of stuff. And there are times when you can get on a really great pattern and catch those fish. But like you said, it's more of the exception to the rule. If you look at the guys who are the most consistent on tour right now, Michael Neal, Jacob Wheeler, Dustin Connell, you have Edwin Evers now. A lot of these guys who are super consistent, they are mastering Livescope. And they are masters of it to an extent that other guys just aren't. And if you can master that technology, you can just literally see the fish. I mean, look at John Sukup. He's fishing the Bassmaster Opens. He finished top 10 in the first Open of the year. He won 2 National Professional League Fishing Tournament, the National Professional Fishing League tournaments last year. Using that technology, knowing how to use it, and also knowing when not to use it is going to be a really big skill. Because, yeah, you may not be able to always catch them on Livescope, but it's also to the point where if you can determine, okay, the fish are not catchable on Livescope, and then determine what you need to do after that, that's also another evolution. But I do think that we're probably at an inflection point, and I know it's probably tough for a lot of people. It's kind of like in basketball, Randy. I follow basketball, but it's like the evolution of basketball where the 3-point shot is the most important thing in basketball now. It used to be the 2-point shot. That was the thing, mid-range and up under the basket, Shaquille O'Neal, Michael Jordan. Now it's all the 3-point shot. Now, does a 2-point basket still work? Can you still have a mid-range? Yes. If you look at the Phoenix Suns right now, they're still doing great with their mid-range shots. But the 3-point shot is still the most important thing, and they start with the 3-pointer, and then if they don't get the 3-pointer, they go to the 2-pointer. That's how the game has evolved. And it's the same thing with bass fishing. I think it's going to be Livescope first, electronics offshore first. If you can't figure that out, then go up to the bank. And I think the reason for that, Randy, and this is the reason I believe this is the case, and this is just my personal opinion, but if you go to Grand Lake, let's say we're here in Horse Creek. For me, I can idle all of Horse Creek, all the key little spots, the most obvious stuff on this map in a day. Give me 8 to 12 hours, I can graph pretty much everything I need to graph in this area of Horse Creek. If you're proficient with your side imaging and down imaging, which is a skill a lot of these guys already had, you can determine where the fish are setting up in this area. You'll know where the brush piles are, where the schools of fish are. If you know what you're looking on your fish finder, then it's not that hard to identify where the fish are setting up in this creek. Now, obviously, that takes a lot of experience and time, but we're talking about the pros here, so they know how to read their fish finder. So if you graph this entire area, you'll know where the 10, 15, 20 key spots are. Well, then, on top of that now, you can pull up and drop the Livescope down there, and you can say, okay, are those fish active? Are they inactive? Exactly how big are they? Because you can sometimes tell how big the fish are in down imaging and side imaging. You can sometimes get a sense for their behavior, but watching them in real time, you can literally pick these fish out and say, this is a crappie, this is a bass. This is a 2-pounder, this is a 6-pounder. This fish is active, this fish is not active, just by looking at the Livescope. And because you now know exactly in this creek where the fish are, and you can pull out your Livescope and you can look at them and see if they're active or not, you can save so much more time over someone who, let's say, has to now go fish this entire creek down the bank. It might take a guy 2 full days to fish every inch of this creek down the bank because there's so much water to cover. It takes 2 full days. Where a guy could scan this in 1 day and know exactly where all the fish are. And there's a chance that if you fish through this area, if the fish aren't active, you still might not catch those fish. So you might fish this whole creek and only identify 1/3 of the spots that have fish on them down the bank, because the other 2/3, the fish just weren't active in that moment. With the electronics, you can say, okay, I know where all the fish are, inactive or not, or active or inactive. And then again, you can pull up, you can say, are they still there? Yes, I know they're there. I know what their mood is. Can I catch them? Can I not? I'll move on if they're inactive, or I'll fish here when they are active. And you can see them following your bait, all that stuff. Now, part of the skill that comes with this is obviously one, finding these spots still comes down a lot of times to side imaging and down imaging. These guys are not just pulling up in random spots in most cases, dropping the live scoping around, picking up the trolling motor, and moving on. That's not how you guys are finding fish. I still believe that Livescope is not a fish finding tool. Instead, a lot of these guys, the top pros, Jacob Wheeler, Brian Thrift, Edwin Evers, they are graphing with their side imaging and down imaging, traditional sonars, to find the fish where they are in practice. That's their scouting. And then they're using Livescope in the tournament to return to the spots they did find, identify the mood of the fish, and then figure out how to get them to bite. That's not as easy as it's said either. It's very hard to... It takes a lot of time on the water and experience to be able to tell what a fish's mood is looking at the fish finder, what bait to throw, when to stay, when to go. And that's what separates an average angler from a great angler. I guarantee you, if you gave the same 20 waypoints in Horse Creek to someone on this live stream that's never used Livescope before, and you just give them Livescope and you give them those 20 waypoints, and then you put Edwin Evers out there with Livescope or Jacob Wheeler, they're going to catch 3 to 5 times more fish than you, because they're going to know exactly how to pull up in position on the spot, how far to stay away, where to put their beam and their transducer, what baits to throw, how to retrieve it. And if you don't believe me, that's fine, but that's just the facts. These guys are really good at just fishing in general too. So it's not one of those things where just having Livescope and the waypoints of where the fish are would make it an even playing field. There's still experience, there's still time on the water, there's still instinct that will help these guys catch more fish than you, and it's just experience with that technology. The key, though, is that guys have to actually get experience with the technology to learn it, and as we grow up, all these people that are even younger than me, I'm not that old, but a lot of these high schoolers now, they're growing up, they're going to grow up with Livescope. And I think that a lot of these anglers are going to say, I'm going to start Livescope first. I'm going to try to do all the Livescope stuff. And then if that's not working, the next generation of anglers is going to be able to quickly say, okay, I use my electronics to identify all the spots. I can see if the fish are active or inactive. If they are inactive, now I'm going to go up to the bank and try to catch them up shallow. That's like the perfect quote-unquote angler. And I don't think anyone's quite there yet. I know we got a lot of guys who are really good, Jacob Wheeler, Edwin Evers, who are really close to that. But I don't think there's anyone who's really cracked that code perfectly. But that's at least my opinion on it. What do you think on all of that?
Yeah, I don't want to get into their big Livescope deal here, but I think we've got to address this because there's a lot of it pertinent to the tournament we're talking about here.
Yeah,
Jonny made a really good point when he's talking about the time that it takes to learn this, because here's the big difference. You got somebody like Jacob Wheeler that lives on the water, and he spent thousands of hours learning Livescope, just idling around learning it. Not only learning how to interpret what he's seen, but interpret the fish in relationship to what he's seen. Because you can see fish on a Livescope. You got to know how they're positioned. You got to understand their mood, their personality. You know what's going to take them to generate strikes, if they're bass or not, the size of the bass. But some guy that just buys Livescope because he's hearing all this talk about it, he's probably going to be pretty disappointed in his results because it's not going to be like Jacob Wheeler. But here's sort of my thought on the whole thing overall. We got to get back on here. It's like, let's take Major League Baseball, for example. Major League Baseball bans aluminum bats. You know why they ban aluminum bats? Is because the ball jumps off of it harder. And if Major League Baseball players were allowed to use aluminum bats like they do in AAA and that type of stuff, these guys had hit 100 home runs a year. So the Major League Baseball, bans aluminum bats for the tradition of the sport. And that's my point on the whole thing. As far as what we talked about, it's the same thing as the bat analogy. There's no difference on it. But I've been outspoken about it, but I don't have anything against the people that are using it. I mean, I don't want to come across that I'm trying to make somebody feel bad if you're a Livescoper, but I'm not. You're just taking advantage of what's out there and the legality of the rules. Until we get the tournament directors to intervene to some point and say, okay, we're going to have a deal where you can use Livescope in practice, but you can't in tournament, or this is a Livescope tournament, this is not. It's never going to end like that. And but like I said, it's the only way that you can utilize it to the point of like Edwin Evers and Wheeler and Connell and Michael Neal's like that is it takes more time than people have. The average bass angler simply does not have enough time to spend on the water to understand it and to get a grasp of it like these guys do. And that's the whole difference. I mean, and that's the sort of the way it is with any type of electronic technology. I mean, look at how much time you spend idling in a day's time, Johnny. You've got thousands of hours being able to interpret what you're seeing on all of your sonar units. I remember I had the chance to spend about a week with Aaron Martins when side imaging first came out. Now, how long ago was that? This was like 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But Aaron came over. He spent a week with me at my house. We went fishing all over the place. We went to Table Rock, Stockton, Grand Lake, and all he would do was side image. And we were actually practicing for a couple of tournaments. He would spend 6 hours a day side imaging everything, and he would put a waypoint on anything that looked good. It doesn't matter if it was a stump, it was a lay down, a brush pile, something like that. And he said, well, I'll just go back and fish that in the tournament. I can't fish like that. I even told Aaron at the time, it says, I appreciate you showing me all this, but I cannot fish like this. This is just not the way that I fish. And it takes that type of commitment, and it takes that type of drive and motivation in order to get to the point of like Jonny is, or like Edwin Evers is, or it's like Connell does. It's like, it's the difference between being a professional and just, a weekender. It all comes with time. And you simply cannot expect to catch fish like a Jacob Wheeler or Michael Neal unless you put that time in with it.
Yeah. I have a couple things I want to throw out there. I'm getting some guys in here who are being wise guys, so I want to address some stuff before people, I don't want to let some of these comments slide, so I'm going to get my soapbox for a minute on this. But a couple things. One, this is not one of the comments, but this is from Jared. He says, I know Jonny is a SATS guy, so are the weights truly heavier since the introduction of Livescope? I wouldn't say the weights are heavier. I haven't looked into all of that, but what I will say is that if you look at the guys who are at the top of the sport, the most consistent guys, Jacob Wheeler, your Dustin Connell, Brian Thrift was super consistent. And he was using 360 imaging before anyone else really was doing that, and he was an expert at that, and that was still kind of a type of forward-facing sonar. Edwin Evers, these guys are using forward-facing sonar to be more consistent. I wouldn't say that the weights are heavier, but I'm saying the guys who consistently finish at the top of the field are the Livescopers. The Livescopers are consistently having higher finishes. That's what I have seen. Second quote is, and I'm not going to, this has nothing to do with the guys over at Tactical Bassing, but Seymour Bass said, I just watched Matt and Tim smash them on Chick in his wife's boat with no graphs, big bags that came with no Livescope. He says, Matt and Tim, no bass behavior. It takes no skill to do what Jonny is describing. Okay, so I'm going to address that point. One, Matt and Tim are great anglers. They know what they're doing. They also know Chickamauga and the guide out there. And it is perfectly reasonable to think that they went out one day with all their electronics and potentially found those fish on a day with their electronics, then went back out the next day and caught those fish. It's very rare that when you see a YouTube video, these guys just show up day of, go out and just catch a bunch of big fish. A lot of times they fish that like 2-3 days in a row. They know where the fish are. They pre-practice. I don't do that for my videos. I just go out and fish. Now, there is a chance that they did just go out there and catch fish, but they also may know Lake Chickamauga like the back of their hand. They fish out there, a ton. They're guides out there, and they're fishing in the time of the year when the fish are up shallow and they don't need to use their electronics. So I'm not going to, I want you guys to think, one, that just because you see someone on YouTube, and this is not anything against Matt or anyone, there's other guys on YouTube do this. If you see someone catch a bunch of big fish, that doesn't just mean that they went out there that day and just were able to catch them because they're the best anglers in the world. Maybe they put the time and the effort in and all of that, and just time on the water to learn those spots and learn the areas and learn that lake to catch big fish, and that's why you see them catching big fish. That's one thing. Second, them knowing bass behavior is not, just because they went out and caught a big bag of fish one day on Lake Chickamauga doesn't know they know bass behavior better than a Jacob Wheeler or someone who fishes offshore. Bass behavior is something you can learn in so many different ways. if you guys, and I know this probably wasn't a comment about me, because if you've watched my videos, I do a ton of videos on bass behavior, and I know this wasn't a direct offense against me, but like from a pro, it's incredibly incorrect to say that guys who graph offshore and use Livescope have no skill. It takes no skill. Understanding bass behavior is critical for any type of bass fishing. If I'm going out to Grand Lake out here, knowing what water clarity I need to be in to be able to get the fish to be setting up away from the bank, offshore, and be able to feed on my bait is super critical. So that's just one element of bass behavior. The second element of bass behavior that you could take into account is, in general, where these bass can be positioned within one of these creeks. Are they going to be positioned on more towards the deeper middle of the channel out here? They're going to be closer to the shore. They're going to be in the middle of these pockets or guts or drains. Then are those fish going to be positioned on brush piles or rocks based on the sun or the wind or the clouds? Then are those bass going to be setting up on the bottom so you need to fish a jig, or they're going to be suspended and you need to fish a jerk bait? Then you have to figure out what's the mood of those fish, how fast you need to move your bait. All of that is understanding bass behavior. And using electronics, you can basically gather more information about bass behavior because you can see the fish with the electronics. So a lot of times the guys who are using electronics understand bass behavior way better than someone who has no electronics, because they can actually observe bass behavior. So it is completely and categorically incorrect to say that someone who never uses electronics understands bass behavior better than someone who does use bass electronics, because literally having the electronics allows you to observe bass behavior and learn more about it. And that's why I feel like I'm very good at bass fishing, because I've used my electronics to see how bass migrate and move and see how they position. Are they suspended off the bottom or close to the bottom? Where are they relative to these creeks and points? And then you put all those pieces together, and the electronics give you more info that you can make decisions off of. That's the idea with electronics. In general, in anything, in business. Was it better to say, oh, we have this guy over here who just goes off his instincts and says, I think this product is a winner? Is he going to be more successful than the guy who does hundreds of testing groups and uses data from all of these different past results and from the business, and does market research and does Q&A testing or A/B testing, all this stuff to figure out what the product is? Most likely the guy who has the more data and does the more research is going to be better more consistently. Yeah, one time can they knock a product out of the park and get lucky, or just by chance do it? Yes. But consistently over time, someone who has more info is going to be better at what they do. And that's what electronics give you guys. Having electronics allows you to gain more info about what's happening. What's the bottom composition? What cover is around? What fish are around? Are there bait fish there? Then using all that info, fishermen take it, they put it into their head, and then they make the right decision based on the info that they get. So I think that a lot of guys who never fished offshore, they never have used electronics, never tried to do it, they just assume that, oh, if you gave me a $5,000 fish finder and a Livescope in the front of my boat, I could fish just like Jacob Wheeler. It's easy. It's nothing. All that stuff is giving you more info. If I gave you right now all the information the stock analyst has on Wall Street to go make stock movements, but you've never studied the stock market in your life, but you're like, oh, well, I have all the information the stock analysts get, I could just do their job. Well, no, they've trained for years. They know what they're doing. They went to school. They've understood it. So they're going to be better than you as a stock analyst because they know how to use the information. Just like someone who has all the electronics in their boat but never has used them will not be as good as someone who's put the time in to learn and understand them and know how to actually utilize the information the fish finders give them. That is a big soapbox. I just had to get that out there. But that is, hopefully that makes sense. If you guys don't like that, I'm sorry, but that is my opinion.
I agree with a lot of that. I got one point I want to make here. First of all, I'm going to answer Timo's question. No, Timo, my parents were not hippies. The reason I started doing that is that Rick Clunn used to fish in a Speedo in Lake Mead all the time back in the 80s. And he told me if there was nobody around, he'd take the Speedo off and fish naked when he's practicing for the U.S. Open. So he was the one that motivated me on that. So anyway, I got a philosophical question I want to pose to everybody because I want you guys to shoot some comments on this philosophical question regarding Livescope. Let's just imagine for a minute that Garmin came out with this new product. And this product, you could pull up into a cove and you could scan it. It would show you every bass in the cove as clearly as you're looking at this podcast. The technology got to that point. it would track the bass for you. It would actually tell you where they're moving, and you could find out, where they're going in a lake, and you could basically see every single fish in there. And also this unit, maybe they figured out some type of a neurological frequency, and you pulled into this area and you pushed a button on your Garmin unit, and it immediately activated every bass in the cove, and you could catch every bass in there. Would you guys still be for that technology? If technology got to that point, would you be for that? Would you allow that to be legal in tournaments? And at what point do we say enough is enough? That is my point with Livescope, because a lot of people call me a dinosaur because I'm against Livescope. I understand that it makes you a better fisherman. That's not the point. The point is what I'm talking about is the ethics about it. Like, we're starting on this slope that you don't know where it's going to go to. So let me hear some comments about my the theoretical Garmin unit. If you think what would you guys do?
Yeah, that is interesting.
Well, think about it. I mean, would tournaments allow that? If, say, this unit cost $50,000, and all the Jacob Wheelers and the Edwin Evers had it on their boats, and they were unbeatable. I mean, at what point do we say, guys, we got to reel it back in? It's just getting out of hand.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there is a point where technology will get too far. I think that the point that would go too far for me is if the angler no longer has to make a decision based on the information they're provided. If anyone could go out there, this is where it would go too far, Randy. If you put Jacob Wheeler in a boat with the technology, and you took someone who is a average weekend angler who's fished for 2 years and they fish in a local bass club, and you put them on the lake, and both of those anglers have an equal or close to equal chance of catching fish, and all of the skill has been removed from that equation, that's when it goes too far. I don't think we're anywhere close to that, because I don't think that having the technology on the boat right now, if you had two exact identical boats, two of Jacob Wheeler's boats duplicated, and you put Jacob Wheeler in his boat and an average 2-year fish, someone's fished for 2 years, let's say even 5 years in a local club, Jacob Wheeler is going to beat them 8 out of 10 times. There's probably a chance that, the guy might catch fish because there's always luck or just, chance of running into the right fish. So I wouldn't say he's going to beat him 10 out of 10 times. But let's say Jacob wins 8 out of 10 times. If it got to the point where you could run that and 50 out of 50 times Jacob wins and this guy wins and it's completely equal or over a certain sample size, it's literally just a flip of the coin of who wins and there's no skill involved, it's just the same, that's where it's too far. But as long as there's skill and instinct that's needed, decision making, I still think that it's not necessarily going too far. That's at least my opinion.
Yeah, I guess the question is like, and I mean, you pose a good question. How far is too far? And another thing that goes along with that is like, and you're seeing it right now with Lowrance and Humminbird and Garmin. It's like every year they're making an improvement to the product, and the old product's getting outdated. The new product is additional, costs even more money. It's like this never-ending rat race of having to keep up with the new product year after year after year. And that's why I think we talked about it in the podcast before. That's why I quit fishing offshore, because I got tired of every single year having to learn and upgrade my electronics every single year. It's like you get comfortable with something and you'd have to relearn it. And that's why I'm still using the Humminbird Helix, because it has the push buttons, because I don't want to go with the touch screen, so I'm sort of like setting my ways with that a little bit.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too, is it's kind of one of those things where I'm just reading through some of these comments. Guys, I fished for years without Livescope, and I would catch fish. If you watch all my YouTube videos prior to 2 years ago, I had no Livescope on my boat, and I was catching plenty of fish without Livescope. Livescope was not necessary for me to catch fish. I grew my entire YouTube channel and built my reputation as an offshore fisherman without having any Livescope. When I first met you, Randy, I met you a long time ago. When we first started fishing together, we did our Randy versus Jonny challenges, and I didn't have Livescope for the first 12 challenges that we did, and I still won 10 out of the 12 challenges fishing offshore with just side imaging, down imaging, and those units were 8 years old at the time. So you don't, just because I have Livescope on my boat doesn't mean that I don't know how to catch fish and and I don't know what I'm doing. And I know that's not what people are saying on the stream, but it's the same for these pros. These pros, you can take the Livescope away from them and they can still go catch fish. It's just the guys who have Livescope have an information advantage. And if anyone has followed business or knows anything about, like, it's kind of like insider trading on the stock market. If you can get some insider information from someone who's an ex-employee or whatever, you can say, oh, big project's going to happen. I can trade on that and I can make some money. That's almost like what Livescope is right now. If you know how to use Livescope, it's almost like insider trading in the stock market. You could guarantee these returns, like these hedge funds that used to do insider trading. I listen to all these business podcasts. You can guarantee a 30% return from your hedge fund over and over and over if you get all the right edge, all the right information insider trading. And the guys who know Livescope right now, they're literally just have an information advantage, and they literally are just getting that advantage over other anglers because they've learned how to use the Livescope. And that's how I feel about it. And the thing is that unlike insider trading, which is illegal because no one has access to that info, Livescope is available to everyone. If you want to put the effort in to learn it, you can learn it and you can have that same advantage. And these guys who are fishing professionally, they're pros. They can do that. The part that gets tricky, and I understand where you're coming from, Randy, is like, what if you're in a local tournament and you have a guy who is able to fish 3 days a week and really learn his electronics and everything, and he's fishing in this local tournament, and he learns Livescope, and he also has the money to afford that, versus some 20-year-old kid who maybe can't afford Livescope and only can fish 1 day a week because of school. Well, obviously, the kid who has no electronics and 1 day a week to fish is going to be at a huge disadvantage. But he'd also be at a huge disadvantage just for the fact that the other guy fishes 3 days a week and he fishes 1 day a week. So that's a disadvantage right there. So where do you draw the line? Does everyone no practice for every tournament, never fishing the lake and just show up? Yeah. Like, is that where we want to take fishing so that there's literally just instinct on the water that day? Personally, I would love that, but it's a slippery slope if you go down that route too.
Well, when we're talking about, and I've talked about this before, here's my point of view on this whole why it's illegal and everything, because it's as long as the electronic companies have some type of affiliation and some type of a financial agreement with the tournament organizations, that gives the tournament organization zero incentive to put any type of reins on that. But here's the question I'll pose. It's like, let's say, for example, like say I won the lottery and I won $1 billion in the lottery, and I go to Bassmaster or to MLF and say, I'm going to give you guys $30 million to promote the old school concepts of fishing and make it where Livescope's illegal in tournament. Livescope would become illegal in the tournaments.
Yeah.
A lot of what we have with this Livescope being promoted and used it's just business. It's money. I mean, it's a relationship between the tournament organizations and the electronic companies. Well, if that didn't exist, you wouldn't see that play a role like it does right now. Because I've lost count of how many guys that have won tournaments the last year and a half that have said, if it wasn't for Livescope, I wouldn't have won this tournament. I could have said the same thing back when I had my jet boat, but they banned jet boats. I could have said the same thing when I was allowed to haul gas in my boat in 6-gallon cans. I wouldn't have won the tournament if it wasn't for that, but they banned that. I would have won tournaments if they would let me get out of my boat to pull my boat over a mud flat, with a rope around my waist, but they banned that too. So yeah. And the reason they banned that is there's no financial incentive for the tournament organizations to keep that in place. So yeah, it's all like so much stuff. It's all about money,
For sure. And by the way, I saw Seymour Bass saw your comment. He said, "Thank you, Jonny. I appreciate your response. I agree." So Seymour, appreciate you getting back on that too. And again, I know that wasn't anything about me. I kind of got in my soapbox. I wasn't taking your comment as like a negative. I guess I was getting frustrated because I get a million YouTube comments, about this. So this was nothing about you personally, but we just see a lot of comments like that. So I had to get in my soapbox. But for being a great sport and putting out some great discussions, Seymour Bass, I want to give you the Bridgeford beef jerky this week. The giveaway, we give away a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky every week on the stream. So Seymour, just send us a email at info@fishthemoment.com and we'll have Bridgeford send you a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky, 12 packs. Just send your mailing address and we'll give that to Bridgeford and they'll ship it straight to you. So again, thanks for the good conversation starter, Seymour, and hopefully didn't didn't take anything personally. I wasn't saying anything against you. I just got all excited there. But anyways, so Randy, this is one thing that I would say, and I actually, with Major League Fishing, I kind of am bummed the way that they took the they took the tournament, in the sense that the way they do it now with Every Fish Counts is that they fish for 2 days for like this Redcrest. Apparently they fish the full field for 2 days. Then they zero the weights. Then they have the guys fish another round. They zero the weights. Then they fish a final round. And I think that it's a little bit of a bummer that they zero weights. I know you're very much against zeroing weights after every day because, for example, all the effort that Edwin Evers and Michael Neal put in to figure out those fish the first few days was all the waste. And like I think Jacob Wheeler probably would have won the entire event if you combined all of his days. But Bobby Lane beat him by literally 1 pound on the last day. One fish. And Jacob had beaten him almost every single day, had a heavier weight almost every single day than him, but because Bobby beat him on 1 day, he didn't win the tournament. So I don't like that format necessarily, but I personally love the cup events that they do, where they put all the guys in an 18-foot boat with just like a Lowrance HD, like a 9-inch Lowrance, it has side imaging, down imaging, no forward-facing sonar. They have no practice. They don't know what lake they're going to, or even if they did know what lake they're going to, they don't have time to go pre-fish it. They have a 15-minute ride through, and they just go fishing. I would freaking love that. That would be my ideal format for any tournament. If there's a way to like make for local tournaments like that, I would fish every tournament I could possibly fish. Because I love figuring them out day of, fish the moment. I would still be graphing for 8 hours with my 9-inch fish finder. I graph for 6 hours and I would still do that. I wouldn't change how I fish, but that's like for me the purest form of bass fishing. I personally hate practicing for bass fishing tournaments. That's why I really got bored of fishing tournaments, or I got like burnt out. It sucks graphing or practicing for 4 days for an event just to fish for 2 more days. That's 8, 9, or 6, 7, 8 days in the water. That is brutal. I hate doing that. So, like, if we could just have a tournament where you just show up with your boat, no one has any practice, no one has anything, everyone has the same equipment, we just fished, that would be my ideal format for bass fishing. But I know that is probably never going to happen, so that is kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I definitely am not a fan of the start your weights over from scratch. I don't think that is indicative of the true winner of the tournament. I know it's good. It makes for probably better TV, but not from a competitive standpoint.
For sure. Man, there's so many comments. I'm glad. Thanks for all the responses, everybody. Hopefully, I'm just trying to read through some of this stuff. Rolling through. So one thing here is someone was saying that in terms of if experience was the most important thing in bass fishing, then Rick Clunn would win every single tournament. And I think that's, one thing that we will say is that, I know Rick really well. Randy, you know Rick really well. And same thing with Randy. Randy has a ton of experience. So if experience was the only thing in bass fishing, then obviously Randy and Rick would still be dominating. But there is also the idea of learning new technology. And I know that fishing with Rick, he didn't really embrace side imaging, down imaging, or Livescope. He's trying, but it's not really what he wants to do. And same thing with you, Randy. You really never embrace side imaging, down imaging, Livescope. And again, it's to that whole idea of getting more information. You guys are kind of leaving extra information on the table and doing it the way that you guys had been doing it, which is fine. It still works. But consistency-wise over time, like Rick has won tournaments, even up to a couple of years ago. So it's not like he can't win tournaments. It's not like you can't finish high. You're finishing high in the Opens. You get, a 10th place finish out of 200 guys in the Opens, which is an awesome finish. But the consistency of it is so much harder when you're at an information disadvantage to other anglers by not fully utilizing electronics. Would you agree with that?
That is not a truer statement have been said before. That's exactly what it is. And I'll sort of explain to you guys a little bit in my evolution why I haven't adopted that, other than besides the fact that as far as the tradition part of it, is, you know, when all this new stuff started coming out, and it's like guys started fishing offshore and guys started utilizing electronics on a lot higher level. I remember, and this was like 20 some years ago. So I was at the top of my game at this point when all this stuff was going on. And I remember saying to myself, even I was at the top of my game in the sport, and all this new stuff was coming along. It's like, I don't want to take the time that it's going to take to learn that, because the time that I spend learning that, it's going to take away of my mastery of the skills and my strong points that I have right now. And then it got to the point after I saw that there was some sustainability with it and people were doing well with it. Then I said to myself, it's like, well, I'm so far behind the 8 ball now. It's like, I could never get caught up with these guys that are good at it. So it's like, if I start adopting it or utilizing this technology right now, that puts me at a huge disadvantage because I do not have the skills that these people have. And so I can't compete with it. So, and I started saying to myself, say we were at a drop shot tournament. Like, I remember we were at a drop shot tournament at Lake Martin one time. And I remember telling myself, it's like, I cannot compete with Aaron Martin's drop shot for spotted bass in 40 foot of water. I can't win like that, but I can win going up the river and flipping a jig on shallow wood. So I would go up the river and flip a jig on shallow wood. And this continued year after year after year. And my offshore electronics game got weaker and weaker and weaker. And I could still compete shallow, but still, that's how you fall behind with it. And that's how, experience can hurt you a lot of times, because I've had so much success doing everything besides fishing with my electronics that once you start getting at a certain age, you resist that. You just totally do. And it's the same probably with Jonny. When Jonny gets to be 70 years old, he's probably going to keep wanting to do the way he wants to fish, even though there'll be a new trend at the time. I don't know anybody that has transcended that, including Kevin Van Dam, Clun, Brower, Nixon, Biffle, all those guys. Everybody falls into that trap with experience. It's like the curse of experience.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like you're saying, is that if you're not constantly adapting, and also there's that desire to adapt. I know at some point in bass fishing, I'm not going to want to take the time to go put another 1,000 hours in the lake to learn a new technology. At some point, it's just not worth it anymore, unless you just have that drive. Like, Randy, to be honest, would you, if there was let's put aside Livescope, let's say there was a new piece of fishing technology that came out that required 1,000 hours to learn, but if you put 1,000 hours on the water with that technology, you could guarantee that you would catch more fish and be better in the tournament. Do you really feel like you would want to put 1,000 more hours right now into it to go master that technology when you know that maybe it could help you finish 5 places higher in the open standings?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a good point. It's like everybody's got other things that they're doing. It's like, unless you're somebody like Takahiro Mori that has zero in his life going on except bass fishing, you just don't have the time to do it.
For sure. Well, we kind of got off on the whole Livescope tangent. I know some guys don't like that, but it's always fun to talk about it. I removed a couple people in here who were I thought they were making some comments, and then they got a little bit aggressive and started saying some stuff. So if you guys see a couple of comments that got removed, I'm trying not to. I normally don't like to remove comments from people who have like valid opinions, but when they just start like saying like swearing and just start saying stupid stuff, I just remove them, because at that point they're not making. Like, I don't mind people making statements that maybe I don't disagree with, but when they just start like throwing vulgar curse words in there and just saying stuff, they're not arguing anymore. They're just trolling. So if you see some people that got removed, that's the reason why. No need for swearing and cursing and getting mad at people. That we don't need any of that in here. Anyways, so I guess as a summary, Randy, one thing I wanted to ask you is Bobby Lane still won that tournament. At the end of the day, regardless of how it happened, he won that tournament fishing up shallow, not live scoping. I think there's always going to be a way to catch fish on a lake, obviously without live scope, and a lot of times that may be the best way to catch fish. Do you think that there's going to be a point where that is going to be there's going to be so many people fishing offshore that there's going to be enough shallow fish. Maybe it's like, maybe that's not now, but maybe in 15, 20 years where everyone has all the technology and it's a lost art now of going up to the bank and like reading the water and working your jig the perfect way, like your style of fishing. Do you think that could be lost? Because I think that is definitely a possibility, in that guys will forget, like Rick Clunn and you in the fall, making 15, 20 casts on one isolated lay down in the flat. People are going to want to make 2 casts on something because they're like, oh, if I can't see my Livescope, I'm not going to do anything. Do you think that's going to happen, or what are your thoughts on that?
There's no doubt it's going to happen, and especially as the technology evolves. I mean, that's just going to be a natural part of the process. And another thing about bass is, bass are not stupid. I mean, they've been here for millions of years, and they haven't been here for millions of years being stupid. They evolve quick and they learn fast, and they don't make a lot of mistakes because they're not going to be here if they do. So I think that bass, it's going to sort of slowly start getting ingrained in their DNA to avoid certain sounds, avoid certain areas of the lake. I mean, we've already seen them do that. I've seen them do that in the course of my 50 plus years of fishing. As far as their movements are different. I'll give you guys a prime example about Grand Lake. My mom and dad, like I said, they had a trailer house at Grand Lake for 30 years in a cove called Greenbrier Resort. It's over by Sailboat Bridge. And so I spent thousands of days, walking the bank in there, and I had my little 14-foot flat bottom. I knew every rock in the Greenbrier Resort Cove. You could go down there in March for 10 years. Every March, you could put a crankbait on in March, and you could walk the bank, and you could catch 20 bass just walking the bank, casting down the sides of the bank. Those fish are not there anymore. You cannot do that anymore. Now, did those fish have they evolved to move away from that type of structure? Nothing's different. The water clarity is different, not any different. The structure's the same. The rocks are still there. The docks are still there. Everything about that area is the same, except the bass do not use that like they used to. So I think that, and this was, you got to remember, this was 40 years ago. So bass evolve and they move and they learn, and they're going to do that with Livescope too. They're going to slowly start getting away from that and make changes.
For sure. And someone said, Samuel, you're a good point. He said, one named John Cox. John Cox is super consistent angler. And I think that he is one of those examples of those guys who can catch him up shallow. And he has that gift of reading the water and figuring that out. Do you know John at all, Randy, about like how he's able to do that, or, what makes him a better shallow water angler than all the other anglers in the world? Like, why is he so consistent up shallow?
Well, I think there's a couple reasons. He's from Florida, so he got really good at sight fishing, as far as seeing fishing for cruising bass and bedding fish and visible fish. So he got an understanding of how bass live in extremely shallow water and got good at it in Florida. That's why a lot of the success John Cox has had has been around bed fishing in the spring. He's the top bed fisherman in the country. But he makes that commitment. He's committed to the aluminum boat before anybody did. He spends all of his time fishing shallow water, and he does it with techniques that normally are not associated with it. I remember that FLW he won at Chickamauga. I was fishing the exact same set of stripers trees that he was, and I was flipping a jig on him and a creature bait, and he was throwing a wacky rig in 6 inches of visibility and wins the tournament. I would have never thrown a wacky rig in 6 inches of visibility in the post spawn, yet he does stuff like that, and that's how he's so good at it.
For sure. And I think he does a lot of sight fishing as well too. He's kind of like, that's his own style of Livescope. I think he sight fishes more like year round than people think. Would you agree with that too?
Yeah, he's cruising for bluegill feeders. I mean, just bass that live up shallow, swimming around, feeding on perch. I mean, he talks about that all the time, about leading fish that he can see. But he's like the Jacob Wheeler of shallow water fishing. He's on a completely different level. He's better than Brower or Clunn or any of those, or Biffle or any of those guys ever were. I mean, he's got it to an art, a science.
For sure. Some people are asking, they said, did we talk about how Bobby won? We did a little bit. I can go into it again if you guys want me to go a little bit more. Travis asking, where did Gummy go? He had some good points, but then he started swearing a lot, and a lot of his comments started getting hidden, and then he started saying some other questionable things. So I was keeping him in for a minute, and then he started saying a lot of very not nice things and swear words that you guys weren't seeing, but I was seeing. So I had to stop that in case some of his comments got through. So I apologize. Again, I don't like to remove people when they have just they're talking normal, but when they start like bashing and saying swear words and stuff like that, that's not cool.
And Gummy also said he caught a 27-pound bag with a 9.5 pounder the same day at the Redcrest. So I find that a little bit questionable at Grand.
Well, yeah. So I don't know. That's all it was. It wasn't about his opinions or anything like that. It was more of a. I like to keep it. I don't like people swearing and trashing other people. That is not the point of this stream. This is for discussion about fishing. So we can get into a little bit more about what Bobby was doing. Admittedly, guys, I didn't look 100% into what was going on with Bobby. Like, I didn't follow it. I didn't have enough time to follow it every second. And I'm not as much of a shallow water guy either. So I know what the guys were doing offshore and Wheeler and Evers and all of them, but I can at least show you one bank where he did catch fish that I saw from one of the live streams. And this is in the back of Drowning Creek, guys. This is Drowning Creek on the lower end of Grand Lake. And the big thing that, again, at the beginning of the stream, I talked about how the fish were setting up mainly in the clearer water sections of this lake, and we had a lot of runoff in our area of the country right before this tournament that made the back of a lot of these creeks chocolate milk. Like, I'm talking 6 inches visibility or less, and it was cold water. So you had 45 to 50 degree cold water. So what Bobby did is he got in the back of one of these creeks that had still clear water in it. For whatever reason, the runoff in here didn't muddy up this creek that bad, and so he was still able to get into the back of this creek that had some clear water, like maybe 1.5 feet, 2 foot of visibility. What he was doing is he was cranking a Berkeley Fritz side, which is a flat side crankbait, and I'll show you here in a second. And he was fishing what looked like a lot of these steeper rocky banks back in the back halves of these creeks. He wasn't on the flat banks, kind of the traditional spawning type banks you would expect on Grand Lake, those 45 degree chunk rock banks, or like the even like flatter pea gravel banks, which are more common in March on Grand Lake, like this sort of stuff. He was definitely more on the steeper banks, but a lot of these steeper banks were where they transitioned from real steep banks into shallower water. So another example of this would be over here, where you have a really steep bank right here and then transitions into a flatter pocket. And these fish were basically staging in almost like their winter areas. These really steep banks are more of like a January, February type bank. A lot of guys, I think, were fishing these kind of transitional 45 degree banks or even back up in these pockets and coves because the water was rising. And that rising water did play a little bit of a part. Andy Montgomery caught a couple fish on a buzzbait the last day, or a spinnerbait, sorry, up shallow. But basically, they were catching their fish, or Bobby was catching his fish more on the steeper banks, more the wintertime banks, just because that water temperature dropped so much due to the due to all the rain, all the runoff that was cold, and it dropped the lake temperature. And right now, I saw Kevin was saying that it was definitely the water temperatures are still 48 to 52 degrees here. And like right now, this past weekend, and we're almost at the first week of April, so that is cold water for Grand Lake this time of year. If we take a look at this on Navionics, guys, basically what you'll see on a lot of these banks that he was fishing is they aren't necessarily deep banks. His boat might have been sitting in sometimes 10 feet of water, but he was casting to the steepest bank in that area. So he was fishing steep banks, not necessarily deep banks, if that makes any sense. So this bank here is where I saw him catching a 5-pounder in one of the clips, and it's the steepest bank in this entire region, but it's also right in front of a transition bank and a spawning pocket. Here's another really steep bank right here that you could see that, you know, the bank comes up really steep. That could be a spot. And then also some of these really steep banks right here. And I think that there was something about this creek in particular that these fish were setting up on these steeper banks. Probably helped because we had a lot of wind and cloud cover as well. And it seemed like that bite was really good up until about the middle of the last day. And for whatever reason, that bite started to slow down. And then Bobby started going to fishing a jig back behind boat docks. I don't know exactly where he was fishing. I didn't have a chance to really dig into the footage to see exactly where he was fishing. But he did catch a big fish, like a 5 or 6 pounder off of the back of a boat dock. And he also caught a really nice fish at the end of the day. And basically, there's a ton of boat docks on Grand. Again, I don't know exactly which boat docks he was fishing. But he was getting behind the cables and behind the walkways of these boat docks. And he said the fish on the end of the day were getting dirt shallow. They were getting like right up behind these boat docks in 2-3 feet of water. And he said he caught some of those fish in practice when the water was, or when it was sunny and the water was a little bit warmer. But what actually happened during the tournament is that we had a cold rain, which rose the lake 3 feet and cooled the water down. So a lot of those fish that were pulling up to those docks and up in shallow water probably pushed away from those positions. And he said he never caught a single fish behind a boat dock for the first 3 days of the tournament, but he caught some really key fish the last day because finally they got some warm, sunny days. The water started to warm up and those fish moved from the steeper channel swing banks here back behind some of the flatter boat docks, and he was able to make that transition. And that's a lot of times the key to catching fish in tournaments, guys, is he caught them for 3 days cranking steep rock banks, but he saw those conditions change. He knew he could probably get a bite in the boat dock, and he followed his instincts, went a little bit shallower back behind the boat docks, caught a 6, and he caught a 2-pounder at the end of the day that he had to reweigh like 3 times, and that's kind of his winning deal. And his winning bait, if I pull up Tackle Warehouse here really quick, was the Fritz side. Fritz. Is it one word? I don't know how this. There we go. Fritz side. I think he was throwing I don't know exactly which one of these he was throwing. I don't know if he's throwing the 7 or he was throwing, I think, this one right here. I don't know what size that is. The middle one, what looked like on camera. I don't know. He may have been throwing one of these, but it looked like he was throwing it in some sort of, I think it was that one right there. And he was throwing it in some sort of craw pattern. I think it was this pattern right here, the spring craw. He's fishing spring craw in this medium size. I think that was the bait. And then he was fishing a jig, just a jig. Nothing special about a jig, so he was fishing a jig. And while I have you here, by the way, Gummy 2, he's back. Gummy, as long as you keep the swear words out of it, I am good with anything you say. Just keep the swear words away, and we're good to go. I don't mind your comments, your opinions. Just as long as you keep the swear words out, we're good. Anyways, so let's see here. I can't block a movement. So anyways, if we go over here to that's not the right color. Oh, sorry. I'm very colorblind too, guys. So I might be giving the wrong color. I'm literally colorblind, so I know that I might not be giving the right color. But really quick here, Randy, too, while we're over here, if you guys you like all the information here and you do want some help breaking down some of your lakes, I definitely would recommend heading over to our lake map breakdowns over on fishthemoment.com. We have breakdowns for shallow water, offshore, and we have Matt Steffen doing northern lake breakdowns. And Randy has a ton of lake breakdowns that he does. You get 40 GPS waypoints that get transferred straight to your fish finder. You get detailed area descriptions as well as keys for fishing the lake. And you can actually transfer these waypoints straight to your fish finder that show up on your map. So definitely check these out. Randy spends hours making each of these maps, and you can kind of take a look. You can search through your lakes. If you want a spring breakdown right now, Randy's pumping them out every single week. We have almost all the major tournament lakes, pretty much all of them in the country here. And if you don't have one of your lakes in one of our stock breakdowns, you can also get a personal lake breakdown from Randy and also from Matt right here. And we do about 4 of these a week for the personal ones, so definitely check those out. We restock them every Monday. Again, we also have a few offshore breakdowns from me. I don't really do too many of them anymore, unfortunately. With the app and everything, I'm kind of running out of time on stuff to do, making videos and stuff. But then you can also check out Matt Steffen's lake breakdowns. He's knocking out a ton of them for spring lakes. He has some California lakes and also has a lot of northern lakes as well, all across you have your southern smallmouth lake breakdowns too. So if you guys want to fish smallmouth on your southern lakes, got a bunch of stuff right here. And then he also has some summer lake breakdowns for these northern lakes as well. So definitely check these out if you have smallmouth in your lake and you want to learn about that, or if you want some northern lake breakdowns from Matt Steffen right there. All this can be found over at fishthemoment.com. So definitely check all that out. Randy, any comments on the lake breakdowns and stuff?
Yeah, if you guys are looking if you have a lake that you don't know much about, or a lake that you want to know more about, or a lake you're getting ready to fish, like I said, we got the ones in stock that are on the website. And then we make personal breakdowns we've had guys want to break down a 200-acre lake before. So any size lake, we can break it down. We do it off of the Google Earth mapping, and it's just a great resource that'll save you a lot of time as far as finding fish when you get out there.
Good deal. I think Gummy over here has a crusade or something against us, Randy. He's just now throwing a bunch of shade. If you guys want to watch the world burn, that's fine. We keep it positive over here, and if you don't like what we're doing, you don't have to watch. That's the way it goes. So, anyways, that is perfectly fine. We are not here to make anyone angry or upset. We are just giving our opinions, but obviously opinions can't make people upset. So hopefully people who are here enjoy the content, and if you don't like the content, then I'd appreciate if you just didn't watch. And there's a lot of other things you can do with your life, and coming in here and trolling us is not productive. So we'd appreciate just to do other things with your time, make an impact in someone else's life, positive impact. That would be appreciated. So anyways, Randy, final thoughts on Major League Fishing Redcrest and just everything that went down this past week.
Final thoughts is I am tickled to death that Bobby Lane won the tournament without Livescope. That just all of the old school dudes like myself, we need that type of little boost once in a while, that it can still be done. So congratulations to Bobby for winning that tournament. And like I said, kudos to Matt or Jordan Lee and Evers and Jacob Wheeler for showing us that there's fish to be caught that we didn't even know were out there on Grand Lake, because I did not know those fish were there myself, and I've spent thousands of days on that lake. For sure.
Definitely agree. It was a cool tournament to watch, and we're going to be back next week, guys, breaking down more information. We're probably going to do a stream, guys, where I'm going to do kind of like a seminar on a specific topic. So no opinions next week. You're just going to be information, breaking down some lakes and talking about what you guys should be looking for during the spawn time of the year and kind of into the post-spawn. And I'll be kind of focusing a little bit more on like offshore fishing during the spawn and kind of getting into the early post-spawn, so you guys can stay ahead of that offshore bite. Right now, it's kind of a tough time of the year as we've transitioned away from the pre-spawn into the spawn. And the offshore bite can get a little tricky, but there are a lot of ways you can still catch them offshore. So if you guys are interested in that type of information, I'll be doing that next week on the live stream, breaking all that down for you guys. Just doing a little one-on-one, just you guys and me. So definitely look forward to that. And Randy, best of luck over on Lake Cherokee. Hopefully you can dodge all that boat pressure, get away from the crowd, and put some big fish in the boat.
Hopefully so. You got 30-mile-an-hour winds the first day of the tournament. Man, I'm ready.
Good deal. Well, I appreciate it, Randy. Appreciate everyone who's on the stream. Thank you all guys for the great comments and all the feedback. Really appreciate all of that. And, obviously some people agree with us, disagree with us, but thank you for all the people who put your opinions in regardless. And thank you guys for just keeping it clean, keeping it positive. And, everyone has a right to their own opinion and what they believe in. Randy and I's opinions are polar opposite a lot of times, and we still get along. We're still really great friends, so it's okay to have different opinions out there, as long as, we're respectful and everything like that. That's how we need to go about it. So next week there'll be pretty much less opinions. I mean, some opinions, because I'm going to be sharing stuff about fishing, but are always a little bit opinionated in fishing, but I'm going to try to stick mainly to facts and everything like that. And so anyways, guys, thanks so much for checking out the stream, and we'll see you guys next week at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, same time as always, same place. Thanks, Randy, and have a great night, guys.